Hi, folks. Welcome to the Wine Foundry, the home of Anarchist Wine Co. and Foundry Wines. This is two of Fatal Attraction, how Cabernet Sauvignon was born. Last week, we explored the very hushed tryst of Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc, also known as Blanc and Franc, and their unlikely love child progeny, Cabernet Sauvignon, is where we're going this week. So we're going to focus on the showiest offspring and the benevolent dictator of Napa Valley, Cabernet Sauvignon. So in addition to the grape itself, we'll take a peek into Cabernet Sauvignon's history in Napa Valley. We'll explore some of the growing characteristics around the valley, including one specific section in the heart of Napa called Rutherford. Tonight we taste our 2014 Cabernet Sauvignon Rutherford AVA designate, and we'll talk about AVAs in a little bit, as well as our 2014 Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, which is a blend, and we'll get into that. So we're excited that so many of you ordered the wines to taste along with us. It's never fun to drink alone, so that makes me feel better. If you didn't order the wines, pour yourself a glass of your favorite, enjoy the show, and make sure, as Stu mentioned earlier at the kind of intro, to get those wines open and moving. Hopefully you saw that in the reminder in your inbox. If you don't have the wines, we record these series, and in your inbox tomorrow, you will have a link to watch it on our YouTube channel. And you can also purchase the wines at the website anytime. Any questions, just reach out to orders at anarchistwineco.com, and we'll get into it. So as I mentioned, we're tasting two wines from our Foundry Wines collection tonight. So several people have asked recently why we separate the Anarchist Wine Co. lineup from Foundry. And really the big picture, you know, that I guess that's the question. The two sets of amazing wines, two different philosophies. And like any good anarchist, the focus of Anarchist Wine Co. is to question norms and conventions. And that's essentially Patrick's winemaking playground, where he constantly tinkers and tweaks and comes up with unique, great combinations, next generation winemaking techniques. And instead of reinforcing winemaking stereotypes, we're trying to create our own new traditions. Foundry, on the other hand, is centered around spotlighting the beauty of grape varietals and the amazing vineyards and regions we're very proud and honored to source from. So we're trying to accentuate the best notes associated with the time and place where those grapes are grown, and to really show how the varietal can sing on its own. So that's what we'll get into. And because this whole 2-week session has been centered around Foundry wines, I thought it might help to get into that a little bit and explain it. So tonight, we explore Cabernet Sauvignon in Napa Valley. Stu, you want to take us to it?
Sure. While Steve said we're going to be exploring, the history and all that stuff, I think the first thing that we should do is start with tasting. So let's get on a really good swirl right now. And I propose a toast to everybody at home joining us. And hey, chime in on the chat. 90% of your grade tonight is going to be typed participation. So the more you share, the earlier you get to go into recess, basically. Is that what that boils down to? But hey, you know the reason we swirl, right? You know this by now. What we're trying to do is, obviously you look cool. And, for me, I just try to do it because I'm always awkward at parties. And so I'm trying to kind of break the tension there. But there's little volatile compounds in here, little esters. And everybody likes ester, right? And what we're trying to do is release them, so increase that surface area. So that's why we try to get in there. Hey, Patrick, what are you, you're checking out the Rutherford. What are you picking up before we kind of jump in here?
I'm getting a lot of dust, Stu. A lot of that. You put dust in the, you put a lot of dust in my own.
Stereotypes. So seriously, what are you kind of picking up? We've got some stuff.
Yeah, this is interesting. And this is a neighbor of G3. Most of this wine is from Ponte Road. And Steve Mathiasen, a well-known vineyard grower and now winemaker as well for himself, has made a number of important wines, I guess, for but they're more of those wines. Most of them they show a lot of finesse, and they're kind of old school and not kind of the new worldish. They're a bit more new world location, but with kind of old world techniques and lower alcohols in general. This is alcohol is, I believe it's, it's still reasonable. It's 14-ish, 14.5. But the wine, the overall profile of the wine shows polished tannins. And, people talk about the dust that Rutherford would have. And a lot of it is to do with the fine grain tannins. Now, but it also has to do with the source of the material. Like if you start with fruit, grapevines that bring, lighter or red fruit profile, red blue fruit, and are kind of show a bit more finesse, as I said, and restraint, then as opposed to right next door, some fruit G3, and some of the blocks, most of the blocks, if not all the blocks, show more opulence on the palate. And I think it's probably more to do with the sourcing of the original material vines themselves than necessarily because they're neighbors and a lot of similarities to them. There's probably small differences in the soil patterns, but not so much in the weather or anything like that. I attribute it more to source material than. But the overall profile is similar though, in that they're fine grained tannins as opposed to the mountainside where you get these chunky, coarse tannins. So the dust refers to, I think people mean the smoothness of the wine and kind of, and when you put it in nice French oak, it gets a cocoa powder kind of spice and other qualities that people associated with some of the big wines from BV, Georges Latour, as maybe the most famous of all the Rutherford wines, maybe going back historically. And this wine, I think, is similar to Georges de Latour's in its profile, I'd say.
Here, let me kind of define where Rutherford is. So I'm going to pull up a couple of maps first, if that's okay. And sorry for interrupting. So here we have Rutherford, okay? And I'm going to move my cursor around because I'm not really good at drawing, but I've made a little circle around Rutherford.
Great circles too. That circle.
I tried to do it very round. It kind of looks like a character from, if you look at, it kind of looks like a character from Easter Island or something like that. One of those big dramatic, just roll with me here. But Rutherford is kind of right in the center of the Napa Valley, kind of perched right in the center. And then as we kind of continue to talk, I'll pull up a more, like a more specialized version, because Patrick said a more specialized map, because Patrick kind of mentioned two different vineyards about that. Why don't I just pull that up and you guys can continue to talk as I just awkwardly and just do great stuff with the flow here, right? Here we go. So here is the two. So now we've kind of moved in on Rutherford. There's two main arteries that go on Rutherford. Here's Route 29, where all the buildings are, shopping, etc. Over here on the east side of the valley of Napa Valley is the Silverado Trail, and here are the two properties, Ponte Road and G3. That's kind of where we're kind of playing with this stuff.
Yeah. What kind of differences do you see? Do you think that they're between, Steve, what do you think between Ponte and G3 as profile and or even like maybe even pairing choices of the style of wine? Do you think would you pair the same thing with G3 that you would with Ponte?
No, I wouldn't. Tasting them on their own, I wouldn't. G3 is a little bit more, I'm going to say the word fleshier on the mid palate, which comes through here in this glass for me. I opened mine at about 4 o'clock, and I've been kind of working it a bit for the last little while. So it is opening up quite a bit, but Ponte has a bit more acid to it. And so I don't know, Patrick, like the vineyards are so close together. So I don't really know what that, like, I don't know, you should talk us through it because you're going to be able to tell me, but when we're confined to a single AVA and two vineyards that are really, close in proximity, and I know maybe they pick at different times, or I know they picked at different times because I was there, but what are some of the kind of, how do you do that with the wine to be able to kind of bring those things together?
A little bit of country, a little bit of rock and roll. right? How do you do
I'd
it?
say that's probably, yeah, Captain and Tennille, perhaps even.
I was going Donnie and Marie, but we can go.
Maybe Donnie Marie, I can
we
see
go.
that. It's interesting because even three vineyards very close. We didn't work with them in 14, Melrose in 14, but we on Wednesday we were in Melrose in G3, and definitely different than we tasted. If you recall, Wednesday we tasted them side by side, the 18 versions of both Melrose and G3, and I'd say that the Ponte is probably more similar to the Melrose than it is, even though it's right next door. And Melrose is only a couple miles north of G3, but I'd say that Ponte and Melrose are more similar in profile in general, and the redder and bluer fruit and a touch more acid, and G3 is just a touch different than that, but still all very much polished fruit profile in general. So and as opposed to the Napa Cab, which is a blend of a number of different vineyards up and down the valley, Napa Cab to me shows more flesh. Steve, what about you? The difference between the two?
Well, I don't know. Well, I haven't tried the Napa Cab one yet. I've just been sitting on it.
Yeah, we'll be going there in a second. Hey, Patrick, can you kind of talk about you kind of threw out some stuff that we talk about at the winery all the time. So you talked about red fruit, blue fruit, moving into black fruit. So, and it has to do with pH or acid strength. Just, we don't want to go too geeky here, but can you give like a minute on pH and palate, or pH and flavor a little bit?
So all wines are acidic, right? Wine is compared to beer and all other beverages in general, it's very acidic. And so, talking about 3.5 to generally to 4.0 range. And of course, it's very exponential in scale. So a 3.8 or 9 is much higher than a 3.5. In general, the lower the pH, the higher the acid, the redder the fruit. So the more sour in general the wine gets. So the same fruit profile, I just added acid to it, it would get redder in color and redder in profile. And so the same wine, if you lowered the acidity, you would get bluer and blacker in color and bluer and blacker in profile as well. So it goes cranberry, strawberry, raspberry, or raspberry probably, then strawberry, and kind of blueberry and darker fruit as it goes on up the pH and down on acid. And so the same wine profile. So you have a certain preference for what you like. Generally, if you're eating food with your wine, then and it has fat in it, which is the best food, of course.
Like this dark chocolate right here.
There you go. And you want something that has some, a decent amount of acidity. So, but it's just all preference. It's very hard to stereotype preference because we all want something just slightly different. So your preference is correct for you, and then Stu's preference is his, and so forth. And so it really does boil down to it. But the pH is critical in the amount of acid in the wine. And if you're drinking a wine on its own as a cocktail wine, the Cab is a lot of times drank this on its own, even though it can go very well with food. It is oftentimes consumed on its own as well. So sometimes Cabernet might be a perfect cocktail wine for people. So within the Cabernet profile, you might want one that has lower acid, perhaps. And if you're drinking it with cheese or some other type of fatty food or spice or something like that, you might want it to have more of that acid. And so redder fruit. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, even within the cheese field, like, I would go maybe a harder cheese, like an aged cheddar. Sometimes you get like that little crystalline character off of some of those things, or because that fat kind of helps balance the acid out. And of course, it's all subjective, but that's where I was gonna go with this. And I'm gonna be enjoying this. It's gonna sound kind of strange, but I'm gonna be enjoying this with some fish tonight. So my wife and I have some salmon that we're going to be using. Most people would say, "Oh, it's going to overpower." No, because we're going to be playing with that salmon and giving it some flavor, which will be able to stand up to a Cab, right? So, yeah, that's fair.
What time is dinner, Stu? Are we allowed to do curbside pickup at this place or no?
You are absolutely allowed to do curbside pickup, but it's going to be very, very small pieces for everybody. A quick story yesterday about food, which was great. We had chicken delivered to the house, which was fantastic. Unfortunately, the phone rang after I brought it into the house, and 7 hours later, I had not put it in the refrigerator. And but I still still went with it last night. 7 hours of raw chicken cooked, because what could go wrong? But I'm a little squeamish today. I'm a little worried. I'm like, you know what? That probably wasn't the wisest course. Full disclosure there for you. Hey, Patrick, nailed the Rutherford. Should we kind of maybe move into wine number 2?
Yeah, real quick though, I'm gonna shout out here. There's a couple comments. It looks like Val's having shiitake mushrooms, roasted Parmesan and Reggiano stuffing. Goes great with this cab.
Nice.
But Delphi, on the East Coast, she and I wrote to each other earlier this week, and she had a steak earlier tonight, and then we're saving this because it's obviously lit after dinner time on the East Coast. She's saying the salted dark chocolate, which is something we recommended, is amazing with this wine, which is interesting because I just had dark chocolate, which is like my favorite dark chocolate, which is from Trader Joe's, 85% cacao. And I really didn't care for it with this wine. I kept eating the chocolate because it's really good, but I didn't care for it with this wine, but I'm interested to try it with that one. I do have some salted almonds that I'll have a little later as well.
And I have some Humboldt Fog over here, one of our local little cheese folks. Sorry, you kind of caught me. Hey, let's get into wine number 2. So we have 2 Cabernets tonight. The first one was from that specified region within Napa Valley, which is called Rutherford. And let's kind of taste number 2, and then we'll kind of get into Napa itself. Mine seems a little bigger, I would say, on the nose at least. It seems like it's gonna be a bigger beast.
Well, yeah, it also, maybe it's just a little bit more open than that's the term I'd use, where it's not, the Rutherford, I think it's kind of tight still. And the Napa Cab is a little more relaxed, at least on the nose. I'm getting getting some barrel spice. And barrel spice, for folks that don't know, that would be kind of think of the spice box in your kitchen, really. You get baking spices, a little vanilla. It's all from the toast of the oak.
There is a question in here, Steve, about the pH of Cab versus pHs of other things, varietals.
Oh, really?
Cabernet Franc or SB from last week when we did. So they're parents of Cabernet Sauvignon. Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc. What are the pH different? What kind of similar pHs or different? What is that?
I'm sorry, I was looking up the questions, and then I got taken away by Emily, who was talking about how Stu should be quarantined for his chicken move. So
Stu should be quarantined for many reasons, and
actually I have been for 7 weeks. But let's talk about pH and so in the industry we don't often say Sauvignon Blanc. We just say SB or Cab Franc. So we would probably pick differently depending on the wine style, and when we pick is going to impact pH, correct? You guys want to talk about that a little bit? At the same time?
pH is definitely going up as the grape is ripening, right? So in the beginning, the inside the grape is very, very, very high acid, low sugar, and as the sugar is going up, the pH is going down, and so we're going. Excuse me, I said it backwards. I said it wrong. I said pH is going up rather, not going down. So it's very, very,
pH goes up as acid goes down.
Sugar goes
sugar's
up,
ripen,
and the acid's going down, right? So it's very, very acidic, and so Sauvignon Blanc is picked generally much less ripe and earlier than Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon are similar sweetness, and Cabernet Franc a touch earlier generally, but it doesn't have to be by default, but it is usually a little bit less. But the pH of a Sauvignon Blanc is typically 3.3 to 3.5, whereas Cab Franc would be 3.5 to
6.5
to 3.7, and Cab Sauv is typically like 3.8 to 4.0, or something like that, or 3.7 to 3.4. So it's a little bit higher generally, just because again it goes for more, you're usually generally going for a bigger wine. So the higher the acid, the leaner and narrower the wine, the lower the acid, the fatter, it's like a profile picture versus a panorama, you know. So the lower the acid, the higher the pH, the fatter the palate it gets, and the lower the acid, and the sharpness and the sourness.
Hey, I'm just going to kind of go on a little detour here, just about Cabernet, if that's okay, Patrick and Steve.
Yep.
Let's do it.
I'm just going to start riffing. So basically in the mid, we were trying to figure out, you know, when did Cab come to California? So originally Sonoma beat Napa to it, but just by a couple of years. So it was it was called Dunfillin Winery, which is no longer with us, unfortunately. But in the late 1800s, United States and Napa in particular, there was this kind of fascination or obsession with, they were Francophiles, all things France. And it kind of came about in the wine world, and with that was transferred to wine. There was this classification system, which some of you might be familiar with, in 1855. If you've heard of first growth, second growth. So and they did this thing in terms of this fair that was going to be in Paris, kind of ranking the wines of Bordeaux. And the Americans kind of got really excited about that. And so they got really excited about Cabernet Sauvignon. And the first person to plant it in Napa was this Morris Esty guy, who his winery was called, his vineyard was called Hedgeside Winery. And that was on it's on Atlas Peak Road. And that winery is still going on. Patrick, do you know a winery on Atlas Peak Road? Steve, do you guys want to take a gander? Very famous, very big winery.
I think I know, but Patrick, do you want to wager a guess? Because I'm pretty sure I'm right.
All right, Steve, let's hear it.
Drum roll.
Del
Dado is still the living legacy, the Atlas Peak Road.
Also known as Del Blotto.
So we are very good friends, so we would not want to scorn or anything like that. But so Del Dado is kind of like the legacy of the very first plantings of Cab Sauv. But at that time, nobody was really interested in vineyard designated wines. There was no Pinot Noir, no Cab. Most people were kind of drinking these field blends. But in 1889, our dear friend Niebaum Coppola, Gustav Niebaum at Inglenook, he got a gold medal at the World's Fair in Paris, and that's when things started to go maybe better for Cab Sauv. Unfortunately, there's this little root louse called phylloxera, which kind of wiped out 80% of the vines in Napa, unfortunately. But we also introduced that to France and almost wiped out Europe. So then, unfortunately, you have phylloxera. Then you have
European grapes.
Wiped out the grapes, not wiped it out. But then you had the Spanish flu, which came in, the Depression, something called Prohibition, which really hurt us, World War II. So it wasn't really till the 1960s when things were kind of started taking shape. Mondavi, what started in like 67 or so. And then that Judgment of Paris in 76. So it's kind of funny that, you know, here we are, part of this long legacy, but it's really, in some ways, sadly, in my lifetime, you know, maybe you're not your lifetime, but my lifetime, which is all this is happening.
And Stu, for the record, I said Del Blotto because they are heavy-handed on their pours.
Oh, okay, that's good.
Not on anything other than that.
No, and it's great that they're heavy-handed on their pours, right? Hey, when we talk about Napa, we kind of look at it. You'll hear Steve, Patrick, and I kind of talk about it like this. There's valley floor. Patrick was talking about that earlier, where that vineyard, G3, Ponty Road. We've been talking about hinting at another vineyard called Melrose. Those are on the valley floor, low in elevation. And then we also talk about hillside plantings, because when you're planted up on hills, when the rain comes, erosion causes all the nutrients to kind of erode to the valley floor. So the vines that are on the hillside are kind of like struggling a little bit. So the berries tend to be smaller, thicker skinned, more power, more oomph. There's also a third region in Napa. And we kind of refer to this as kind of the bayside or cool climate, because if you look at Napa Valley, we're perched really close to the bay. especially in the southern end. So that's an area like called Coombsville, Wild Horse Ranch, those regions that we refer to. So either hillside, valley floor, and that kind of brings us to the Napa Valley Cab, because the morning fogs come in off the bay. Yeah, so we get to play with all of these things. Let's move out. Let's move on there.
I think there's one other bit we could toss in there too,
Sure.
because we talked mountain fruit, we talked valley floor fruit, and then benchland fruit, which, and then obviously the Coombsville Wild Horse Ranch area on the southern end that gets that fog and kind of later ripening influence from the San Pablo Bay. So Patrick, this wine, and I think you're more interesting to speak to it than I am, but you put this wine together. So you've got the Rutherford, where you have a singular AVA, 2 main vineyards. I don't remember let me look on the back of the bottle. It's not on there. On the Rutherford, it's 90+, on both these wines, it's 90+% cab. So you have the whole kind of sandbox of Napa Valley to play with when putting together the Napa cab. You've got, as we mentioned, mountain fruit. We've got benchland fruit, like Broken Rock Vineyard, and no, in 14 we didn't do Rutherford Bench. So, but we've got
in there.
Oh yeah, Mount Veeder. Exactly. So I think we've got like 4 or 5 different AVAs within Napa.
That's right. Atlas Peak as well. Yeah. Odyssey Vineyard is in there as well.
So like when you put this together, how does it change your approach, philosophy or approach to the wine when you're working with all of those different kind of paint or palette wheel or something, whatever the metaphor is?
Palette wheel.
It's a style question, really. The Napa Cab, I really wanted to be ready to go sooner, I guess. And so the Rutherford, it's not so much I wanted to delay enjoyment, as that's more so that I thought that it was a bit more because of the higher acid profile and focused on the Ponty particularly, that it allowed it to be more of an aging wine. And so earlier on, it's going to seem, as you, Steve, you said, closed. It's going to seem kind of, I think of it more kind of 2-dimensionally. It's going to open up and become more 3-dimensional, but we're still probably a couple of years away from that actually happening, really. So I think so that in the meantime, the wine's going to seem compact, and so it's not going to seem open, whereas the Napa is much faster to show you what it has to offer. And so for those that are ready to drink it, ready to go, and want it to be more kind of 3-dimensional open, I think that the Napa shows more of that profile currently. And then so that's mostly to do with because it's a blend of up and down valley, both sides of the valley, north and south, valley floor, benchland, and the hillside. And so you have this kind of, to me, a great balance of all of those things. And so what Rutherford shows is, I think in general, is more, it just shows finesse and restraint, and kind of like it does not allowing it's not trying to, it's not in a hurry, right? And so it feels like a lot of I think some of the old school best wines from Rutherford back in the day were ageable for 20, 30 years because, and again, they weren't in a hurry. And so early on, that means it's not going to show you what it will show you in the future, And so depending on how fast you want it to be there, I think that just depends on what wine you like and your preference for style, right? Wow. So not everyone wants the same wine. Some people think the Napa Valley wine by itself is fantastic, whereas other people think, that's just too much. I wanted it to be a little bit more, so it's very subjective. Just like food pairing is very subjective. So if you love, Stu mentioned some great cheeses, I love cheese. And so there's a huge range of cheese within, whether it's cow's milk or hard or soft and which wine to pair it with. And so typically the higher the fat, the higher the acid with the wine you want to pair. If it is a D to pairing you're going for. If it's not, if you just want to eat the cheese and you want to drink the wine, if you're doing them together though, you probably want higher acid in general with most things, and or if you have higher acid, you might want more fat on the food side of things. So I think that's a good thing to remember as a stereotype, but it does boil down to preference. And so Stu, what's your preference?
Well, I was just going to say my preference is not to be eating on screen, and you guys are getting me really hungry here. So for me, like most people who know me know that I tend to like more elegant, restrained wines. And I really used to love big sledgehammers, but since I just over the course of a day taste so many of those that I need a moist towelette to kind of clean things up a little bit.
Horrible word.
Okay, yeah, actually, it is a terrible word. But I'm kind of really drawn to the nuance of the Rutherford, the Napa Cab. I love, and I'm going to be also kind of playing with this one tonight. But just personally, I'm more drawn to the Rutherford because I look forward to seeing where it is in 2, 5, 7 years, and that's why I'd like to have like a few bottles to trace its course over the course of a period of time.
So Julia earlier had a question, which was basically whether the chocolate tannins and the wine tannins are compatible. And
Great
so I think it depends on the wine, because I tasted the same dark chocolate with both wines and way preferred it with the Napa Cab because there's a bit more open structure to the finish on the Napa Cab at the moment. And so to me, it's got a much more of a lingering kind of tannin to it. It's not the Rutherford also has, I think, a finer grain tannin to me. So yeah, I mean, I think it goes great, but I didn't care for it with the Rutherford for me.
The chocolate.
Yeah, the chocolate. So, but I think chocolate tannins and wine tannins to go well. I think of chocolate and wine all the time.
I think particularly, I said I asked so a very famous sensory scientist when I was in her last class, Dr. Ann Noble. She's the one that invented the wine aroma wheel. Why what about chocolate and wine together, and particularly Cab? And so she said, well, people love Cab, people love chocolate. What's there to ask more? You're like, oh, okay, very good. And so her opinion was that it was less about necessarily the exact perfect pairing, more so that you love these two perfect things.
Cultural, kind of a cultural association.
And you're so yeah.
Yeah,
Anyhow,
because they can do so many things. Cab can be big, it can be elegant. Chocolate can be, like Steve kind of referenced, the percentages of things. Some can have more, cacao or less. You don't know until you do it. And then what Steve likes, Patrick might not like, or I might like, and right. that whole subjective thing.
So there is a question I see from Emily about.
Emily's based.
I think that might be Mark under Emily's account, by the way.
Okay.
So one of the things that's difficult to do, we always do, and generally within life. I'm getting ready to do right now. Again, as I'm saying this, is generalize about things, right? And so when you always hillsides are always this way, and valley floor is always this way, and so the real truth is that underneath the ground, it's not at all uniform. So you can have hillsides that actually have a reasonable amount of topsoil that's not all rock up to the top of layer, and that can be actually reasonably fertile, even though it's the top of a mountain, because it's not all rocky in the topsoil. And you can have valley floor that just so happens to be high in rock or something else down there. It's not as fertile as it might be further up valley or down valley. So there, in general, valley floor, as Stu mentioned, gets all the erosion, right? So all the sand, all the silt and clay goes down to the bottom of the valley, which holds more water and allows more things like that. It's not just nutrients, also it's water holding capacity of the soils and the deepness of the soil. So generally valley floor much deeper than mountainside, but it's not, those are stereotypes. And I say in general, because we have some vineyards, I've seen some mountain vineyards that can produce lush, enormous amounts of fruit, even though it's at the top of a mountain. You're like, oh my gosh, it's just because too, you think about it, the New World has not been farmed for thousands and thousands of years like the Old World has been, which has literally been farmed for a long time. So that we're more fertile here in general. So I'd say that in general, you're right. And valley mountainsides, it produces smaller berries and smaller quantities of fruit as a rule overall, but that's as a kind of generalization, but it's not mandatory that every single vineyard or every block of every vineyard fits that stereotype.
So, and part of Mark dressed up as Emily, because he did confirm that it's him from Emily's account.
Hi, Mark.
They're out of Houston, by the way, and they have a fantastic place called Mutiny Wine Room. I'm going to give them a little plug here. So if you are in Houston, it's a fantastic. Well, I haven't been technically. A few others flew out for the opening. They opened a handful of months ago, and are now doing basically a bunch of wine brands that are, produce under, I think it's, 5,000 cases a year or something like that. And they're showcasing those brands, basically bringing the Napa Valley experience to an area called Houston Heights. And they have killer menu of food, event spacing, awesome wine bar, really cool place too. So,
and Foundry wines.
You're welcome, Mark. Yeah, and you can find Foundry and Anarchist there.
And Anarchist wines. Yeah.
So, but part of Mark's question was talking about hillside berries being more stressed than valley floor fruit, right? And we talk about that a lot, where it stresses the vine. And I always think of it more so, because Mark's question was, how does G3, for example, a valley floor site, produce such good fruit? And I always think of the hillside as giving you structure. So that's like, I think of structure as that, really three-dimensional shape in your mouth, the football analogy that Patrick uses sometimes, and really like a longer stress, or structured finish. So it's just interesting to hear. I'd actually, in 10 years of working together, Patrick, I don't think I'd heard you give the answer that same way. So I thank you for teaching me something today.
I mean, so Mark is a big student of wine and grapes, so he's very curious for sure, and is taking all in. And definitely in general, the smaller the berry, the higher the tannin ratio because it's more skin, less pulp, really, is what it is. And so valley floor grapes do tend to get bigger, mostly due to water. Everything, obviously water runs downhill, and you're going to have more water supply typically in the valley floor. So again, the grapes in general do get bigger and plumper, and mostly lower tannin concentrations. So.
Hey, I invite everyone to go back to the Rutherford cab right now, that it's been, because it's such a baby and it's really starting to open up. The aromatics are really starting, at least on mine. Plus my house is about 90 degrees right now. So not the ideal room temperature, especially for that chicken that I referenced, I left out yesterday. But
are all those records going to warp in that heat behind you?
They'll be fine. I'm just more worried about the owner. Yeah. So
is this a chicken sashimi? Do you have something like that you could offer, as far as the Cabernet, does that go?
Yeah. And I highly recommend it with the Anarchist. We can do a little, just kind of make like putting the fish with the acid with a little bit of lemon or lime. And it'll be great with some chips. Yeah, you know what? That chicken's not going to get a second run.
So,
yeah.
Do you see that question from Bruce?
Can you talk about So Bruce Prothero in Austin, Texas. Can you talk about the cab blend? To give it, can you talk about how you give a cab blend more dimension? What are the decisions you make? So Bruce Prothero's got a brand based in Austin, Texas, Prothero Family Wines. So the way you can do it a number of ways. You can do it in the vineyard by the way you grow the fruit, by how heavy your crop load is, by when you pick, but you can also do it with blending. So with blending, if we're going to call it a Cabernet Sauvignon, we just has to be 75% cab. That's it. We often go much higher than that. Patrick pushes it closer to 95%, because a lot of people who make wine with us like to kind of explore the vineyard and have that be the expression. But the grape that can give really back end dimension, kind of mud flaps in the end, is going to be Petit Verdot, PV. Even a little bit will really, really accentuate the finish. For forward, the fore palate and aromatics, Cabernet Franc. But Cab Franc's going to pull the wine forward, right? And then for mid-palate dimensionality, mid-palate through the finish, Merlot and Malbec can also give you a little fruit punch, like a little round little ball of fruit right in there. And the way you play with those algorithms will shape the palate, kind of like how Patrick talked about with the football last week. But the funny thing is, it's not always A plus B equals C. When people approach us, I'm talking with people about making wine, they'll often say, hey, I want to come in and do 3% Merlot, 2% Cab Franc. And it's like, no. Let's listen to the wine. And I know that sounds kind of hippie-ish. Listen to the wine, see what the base wine, your Cab Sauv or your Merlot is bringing. And then when you're working with Patrick, we will shape it to nail the structure that you're looking for. Is that a fair answer there, Steve?
Yeah, no, I think it absolutely is. And also, Val, for those that aren't watching the chat, Andrew Zimmern, I think it might be Zimmer?
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay, he did a chicken sushi demo at Bottle Rock last year, so it's actually a thing. So Stu, when Bottle Rock comes back, October 2nd through 4th, hopefully.
But a chicken sushi thing doesn't mean a chicken sashimi thing at the same, right? So I think that maybe Stu's is
no, it is. It actually there is. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the documentary where they talk about having sushi, or I think maybe it's David Chang kind of talking about that with the raw chicken stuff. But Andrew, a friend of the winery, right, and also the craziest eater on the planet, except for me, about to demolish this food. Esteban, what do you think?
Well, about your use of the word moist, I don't care for it.
Thank you. I was actually just going to kind of invite everyone. I know it's getting late, and we've been talking about food. We've been talking about Rutherford. We've been talking about Napa Valley. We've been talking about blending. Valley Floor, Hillside, Hatfields, McCoys, so many things in between.
Captain Tennille.
And Donnie and Marie.
And
got it all in there.
Niebaum.
Did I say Mr. Niebaum Coppola?
Yeah, our dear friend Gustavo. How long has he been dead before we were around?
I went to high school.
Yeah. So, folks, thank you very much for joining us. As a heads up, we are changing our programming, excuse me. So now we're going to be every other Wednesday for the Anarchist Wine Co. and Foundry Wines Inquisitive Sips series. And the Wednesdays that fall in between, we have our Wine Foundry Wednesdays, where we get a little deeper into the vineyards and the winemaking side of things and viticulture. So if you're interested in that, you can absolutely find it at winefoundry.com under the news section. It's in our blog, or just shoot us an email to orders@anarchistwineco.com, and we'll gladly share it with you. And they're two different
series
sessions, and exactly. But our next Anarchist Wine Co. Inquisitive Sips is Wednesday, May 20th, as Stu mentioned earlier, and that's going to be moving to 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and that is tougher for some of the folks on the East Coast. So Andy and Frank, who I see on here, and Delcy, and those of you, sorry for that. Hopefully you can stay up and stay with us. We've gotten some feedback as people are getting back into work a little bit more, that 5 o'clock was a little rough for them. So hope you bear with us. And if not, you can always watch the recorded sessions. But so Wednesday, May 20th, what's very cool about it is we have a company called Coco Tutti, which is a chocolate company, and another kind of friend of the winery that has made some chocolates for us before that we've done, and she's going to be pairing some chocolates that she's making for 2 of the Anarchist Wine Co. wines. 15 Minutes of Fame, which is a sparkling rosé wine that we've just almost officially released, but our wine club members got to it first, and then and I see a ton of wine members on this series, so that's awesome. Thank you very much, and hopefully you're enjoying the 15 minutes right now. And the Rage Against the Machine is the other one, which is a red wine. I think it's 8 varietals blended together, our 2017 Rage Against the Machine. So she's actually going to formulate chocolates that go with that. So we'll be putting that out next week, so that you'll be able to, if you'd like, you can order the chocolates from her. She ships all over the country. And then we can send the same 4-packs or 2-packs and all of that. Those will be up on our site and by the weekend or end of the weekend and all of that. So that'll be a lot of fun. So we're going to kind of change up our programming a little bit. We're also talking to some chefs about doing some unique food and wine kind of demos as well. So you don't always have to stare at the three of us, and that might be very refreshing. Certainly don't have to hear Stu use the word moist so frequently. I think that's about it. Oh, next Wednesday for Wine Foundry Wednesdays, for those of you on there, we are going to have a very special guest, Frederick Johansen, who is the winemaker, the head winemaker for Staglin Family Vineyards in Rutherford. And Fred is also an old friend of Stu's, and he's a colleague. He's a terrific guy, and you can log in to see he and Patrick banter about Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon and different winemaking techniques. And Fred's a terrific guy. So reminder for that. And then also the book group, which is Stu's kind of pet thing. So I'm going to hand it off.
Oh man. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for dropping it on me. Fantastic. Who had the idea of having a wine centric book group, but it's nice seeing everyone kind of register for it. So our next month, so it'll be the Thursday after, would be May 21st. So after the next Inquisitive Sips, we're going to be cork dorks. If you're tuned into this, you've already got problems. We know you. If you're watching wine in this way, we've got to talk.
You really need help.
So,
help.
Exactly. So Bianca Bosker's book, Cork Dork, where she kind of talks about you, in effect, the grape obsessives, the freaks, the interesting people, Psalms, and she does it in a really light-hearted way. I've been keeping it right here by my desk and just kind of plowing through. I finished it for the second time, so I can be prepared. And it's been nice seeing people outside of our little winosphere, outside the people who make wine, signing up. So if you haven't received the book yet, you can order it from our Napa Book Mine, or you can get it from your favorite online retailer or local one, and you'll read it in literally 2 days. Literally, it's that kind of quick.
Stu, I've got a recommendation for the next book.
Please.
It is called something something.
Thank you, Patrick.
It's called Neuroenology: How the Brain Creates the Taste of Wine. And so it's a little bit.
It's out of print. It just went out of print.
Oh, did it?
Yes, we wanted to do that for June.
You know what we'll do is I'll sit there, on that session, I'll read you the book on that session. Okay, it'll take
a long time.
14 years. We'll have plenty of time. We have lots of backup storage on the server, I think.
It'll be like Daniel Radcliffe reading Harry Potter, right? So yeah, I know we were going to do that for June, and somebody told us it went out of print. So we'll take a look at it again, because that was the one somebody had recommended, and I advocated for June, but other people have one. Hey, we're going to stay on and answer questions about Rutherford, about Napa, and about the Anarchist Wine Co. So if you want to stick around, we would love to have you, but we're going to stop the recording right now, and we wish everyone who's signing off safety, health, and we look forward to raising a glass in person soon. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers. Thank you so much.